One of the concepts that's been very, very helpful over the last couple decades in working with firewalls is the idea about zones. And here's the concept. If we have a network topology like this one, and we know that we're going to have a DMZ zone, and maybe we have some public servers in here that we're hosting, and then we have an inside zone or inside network, which is more trusted. I don't say it's completely trusted, but it's more trusted than everything over here in the middle. And in this part here, if it's the internet, would be the outside or the least trusted. And here's the idea about using zones. Be the outside or the least trusted. And here's the idea about using zones. If we have our security rules set up based on zones and say things like, you know what, if traffic is an issue, let that traffic go. And then because the firewall is stateful in nature, the reply traffic coming back to the user, because the firewall is tracking all those sessions and the state of those sessions, and the correct reply traffic is dynamically allowed back in through the firewall, back to the user who made the initial request. So in our policies regarding source and destination addresses, we can go ahead and specify things like the inside. Meaning if the source IP address is coming in on an interface associated with the inside, and it's destined at an interface that's associated with the outside, and if that protocol is, for example, DNS, or HTTP, or HTTPS, go ahead and permit that traffic. Or in the context of checkpoint, accept that traffic and allow it to go through. And the beautiful thing about doing policies based on zones is that if we add more interfaces, let's say we have interface E4 and E5, all we need to do is that when we add those new interfaces to the firewall, we simply associate those new interfaces with zones, the inside or the outside or the DMZ, and then traffic that's going into or out of those interfaces can implement policy based on the interfaces the traffic is coming in from, and what zone that was, and what interface the packet is going to be routed out of, and what zone that interface is a part of. And here's our game plan. If you're logged on to cbtnuggets.com, go ahead and click the link for the virtual lab and practice right alongside of me. And here's what we'll do. We'll start at our PC. We'll use Smart Console to interact with the security manager. And what we'll do is we'll associate the interface E0 on the firewall with a zone called inside. We'll associate E1, that interface, on the firewall with a zone called outside. And then we'll associate E2, Ethernet 2, with a zone called DMZ. And then as part of our policy, we'll create a rule that instead of using an object that points to an IP address, we'll point to an object that represents a zone. For example, if traffic is coming in on an interface associated with the inside as the source, and if the destination is going out an interface associated with the outside, then go ahead and permit that traffic. So without further ado, let's get on PC1 and get to work. So here on PC1, we'll go ahead and launch the Smart Console, and we'll connect over to our server at .110, and we'll supply the lab password. We're logging in as admin, and we'll click Login. So let's first specify which interfaces on Firewall 1 exist in which zones. So to do that, we can just double-click right here on the Gateways and Servers tab. We can just double-click on Firewall 1 to edit its properties. So under General Properties, we'll click on Network Management, and then we'll just go through each of the interfaces to associate them with the correct zone. So let's start with Ethernet 0. We'll go ahead and double-click on it to edit it. In the Topology section right here, it specifies that it currently is not associated with the zone, so we'll click on Modify to change that. Let's click on the checkbox for Specify Security Zone. Then we'll click on the field so we can specify what zone we want to use. And then let's click on New and create our own zones. We'll create a zone called the Inside. And click OK. And click OK. And then OK once again. And now we're done with Ethernet 0. Let's do the same thing for Ethernet 1 and assign Ethernet 1 to be in a zone called Outside. So we'll double click on Ethernet 1 to edit it. We'll click on Modify regarding the topology. We'll put a check in the checkbox to specify the security zone, click in the field here, and click New. We'll call the zone Outside, click OK again, and OK again. That's 2 down, 1 to go, and let's also do Ethernet 2, which is going to be our DMZ. So we'll double click on Ethernet 2, click on Modify regarding the topology, put a check in the checkbox for specify the zone, click in the field, and then click on New. We're going to call this DMZ, click OK, OK, and OK. So now we've got those interfaces associated with their zones. We'll click OK to dismiss this window. And now let's go to our security policies, and let's create a security policy rule that leverages that zone information. So over on the left, we've clicked on Security Policies. And let's add a rule just before the cleanup rule. So I'm going to click on rule number 3, the cleanup rule, and right-click, and select New Rule, and we'll say New Rule Above. And let's call this new rule from inside to outside. And for the source, instead of specifying an object that represents an IP address, let's go ahead and click on the plus symbol for source, and we'll select a zone. In this case, we're going to select inside. And then for the destination, we'll specify outside. So we'll hit the plus symbol. We'll go ahead and double click on outside to place it there. And so the question might come up, well, how does the firewall know if the packet is going to be going out a specific interface? And the answer is routing. The routing tables are considered on the firewall. It determines what interface it's going to forward it out of. And then based on that, what zone that interface is in, this rule could then apply or be a match if that traffic was coming in on an interface that was associated with the inside zone. And also for a moment, I'm going to go ahead and right click on this VPN column, and we can specify what columns we want to see. I'm going to remove VPN from the mix, and I'm also going to scrunch these columns together a little bit so we can see them a little bit more, or see more of the important information. And as we continue on with rule number 3, traffic sourced from the inside, going to the outside, and let's go ahead and choose 3 very popular protocols that our users may need to use. So we'll click on the plus symbol regarding services and applications, and let's type in DNS, and then we'll hit the plus symbol next to that to add that. And let's go ahead and then type in HTTP. And that's going to give us all the objects that have HTTP in them. So we want HTTP. So we'll click on the plus symbol next to that one. And also HTTPS. We'll click on that plus symbol as well. And then we'll close that window. And now we have all 3 of those protocols in the services and applications column. And then we want the action to be to go ahead and accept that, to allow it through. And for logging, just for grins, because we're in the lab, let's go ahead and log that as well so we can verify that this rule was actually hit. And as I'm looking at these rules, I was going to do a test from our management PC using the web user interface over to Firewall 2, but I just see that that is going to be matched here. So management PC going to Firewall 2, if it's HTTPS, that'd be hit on rule number 1. It would never make it down to rule 3. So let's do this. I can also share with you another awesome technique here, and that is disabling a rule without totally getting rid of it. So we're going to right click on rule number 1, and from the drop down for rule number 1, I'm going to put a little check in this checkbox next to disable. And once we publish this and install the policy, rule 1 will not be considered by firewall 1 as it makes decisions on whether or not to forward traffic. And as a result, traffic from our PC going over to Firewall 2 for the web graphical user interface should hit on rule number 3. And we'll be able to verify that by coming back here as well. So we'll click on Publish, and then we'll click on Install Policy right here. And for the moment, we're just going to push our policy to Firewall 1, not Firewall 2. We'll include the details on how to control where the policies get deployed in a separate nugget. For now, we're just going to deploy it to Firewall 1 and click Install. We'll give that a moment to complete just to verify that it takes. And that looks fantastic. So let's go ahead and minimize the Smart Console. And let's open up a browser. I've got an icon for Chrome down at the bottom of the taskbar. And let's go out to https://67.83.0.112. And we're there. We're there. We don't even need to log on. We've already got connectivity, which is fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and just minimize the browser window. And let's go back to Smart Console. And in Smart Console, let's click on rule number 3 here. And down below, the Logs tab is currently selected. It's showing all the hits that it got. So if we look at any one of these, let's go ahead and just double click on one of these packets. This is showing us that it was rule number 3. The rule name was from inside to outside. The source IP address was the management PC. The destination was Firewall 2. And we are going to the well-known port of TCP port 443 using HTTPS. And the policy said, please permit that or accept that. And that's why that communication was successful. And I would encourage you, if you have a few minutes, to connect to cbtnuggets.com, to log on, launch the lab, and do this hands-on to reinforce what we've learned in this nugget and to increase your skills in working with Checkpoint. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.